He rides into town, there's a job to be done. Comes with the dawn, leaves into the setting sun. All of the villains, he fills them with dread. The mysterious stranger with pubes on his head. Nobody knows where the stranger calls home. Has no companions, he travels alone. His folks never gave him no name, it is said. They just called him the kid with his pubes on his head. Pubes on his head, pubes on his head. They just called him the kid with his pubes on his head. Pubes on his head, pubes on his head. The mysterious stranger with pubes on his head. He travels in search of a place to belong, but always his background is one more lonesome song. With never a place he can make him a home, always to wander, always to roam. He sleeps every night in the light of the moon, but it don't come easy, he wakes way too soon. He saddles his pillow, the dirt is his bed, with a headscarf protecting the pubes on his head. Pubes on his head, pubes on his head. A scarf keeping dirt off the pubes on his head. Pubes on his head, pubes on his head. The mysterious stranger with pubes on his head. One day on his travels, a messenger came in search of the stranger without any name. He needed a hero to rescue his town. He pleaded for help, he wouldn't back down. He said they came in the night and they painted their lines. They planted their meters and put up their signs. Some lines were yellow and some lines were red, and they did them while folks were asleep in their beds. And they put in some cameras you had to go past that flashed them a photo if you went too fast. And signs that lit up and would tell you your speed, and then set off the camera if you paid no heed. But worst of all, under the cover of dark, they put up a sign that said Caravan Park. Bastards, them holiday makers from everywhere, they were choking the roads like they just didn't care. And all of the townsfolk no longer could roam, virtual prisoners in their own home. Took them all day just to get off their drive, with slow caravans, nose to tailing it by. They came from the east and they came from the west. The word quickly spread that this place was the best. Soon there was gridlock, no let up in sight, just endless boxes, ribbons of white. So he swung him around, headed off with no word, toward the location where this had occurred. He rode without pause for a day and a night, until in the distance, a terrible sight. He stopped, took one last moment of peace. Then every hellhound was what he released. He aimed first at the straggler, the last caravan. Then his foot hit the floor. That was where it began. He plowed a broad path through the vanguard of white. They scattered before him to left and to right. And picnics in laybys, they just ran for their lives. Nobody knows if any survived. He swept all before him for mile after mile, and he captured the crossroads, he took it with style, and silently stood there. He had him a plan, and he stared at the leader in his caravan. And as the dust settled, you saw through the haze the stranger. He stared with his unblinking gaze, his brim down to keep out the glare of the sun, and his hand hovering over the butt of his gun. Butt of his gun, butt of his gun. His hand held close over the butt of his gun. And he dared him to move, and he dared him to stray. He silently dared him to just make his day. Punk. But caravan man, he just trembled instead. He knew if he drew, he was guaranteed dead. But the stranger still had him a point he would prove before he'd allow caravan man to move. So with eyes coat of steel and a heart made of stone, pinned him right where he sat, showed him he was completely alone. And the standoff, it went on for 29 days. And there every morning the stranger he still faced. But in the first light of the 30th dawn, the stranger he found all the caravans were gone. Yes, they'd snuck out like cowards in the dead of the night. They knew they would lose if it came to a fight. So they crawled off while all of the town was in bed, in fear of the stranger, scared of the danger more than the Lone Ranger, in fear of the stranger with pubes on his head. Pubes on his head, pubes on his head, in fear of the stranger with pubes on his head, pubes on his head, pubes on his head. The mysterious stranger with with pubes on his head. And everyone cheered what their hero had done. Returned them their town, made the villains all run. They quickly declared he was more than a saint, but he just shook his head, turned away, said, "Nope, I ain't." Well, that's just one story that's told everywhere about how there's a hero awaiting out there, about how he comes with the break of the dawn, fights evil, and then with the nightfall is gone, about people who sleep safe at home in their bed, all because of the stranger who dances with danger, the mysterious stranger with pubes on his head, pubes on his head, pubes on his head, the mysterious stranger with pubes on his head, pubes on his head, pubes on his head. Thank God for the stranger with pubes on his head.